Welcome, friends, on Facebook. Welcome to Pub Theology Online. We have been doing online pub theology for the last maybe 6 weeks now during the COVID pandemic. We usually meet at the Friendly Spot Ice House in Southtown San Antonio, but we're coming to you live online on YouTube, on Facebook. We've had a great, wonderful past few weeks. A few weeks ago, we had Pastor Max Licato and Rabbi Samuel Stahl come to Pub Theology. We've had some journalists from the San Antonio Express News and the Rivard Report and TPR also join us a few weeks back. You can watch all those previous Pub Theologies online on our Facebook page or on YouTube. So welcome to this Wednesday night's edition to Pub Theology Online. And I'm with two amazing people in San Antonio, and I'm going to bring them up right now with me. I'm with Dr. Colleen Bridger, the Assistant City Manager of the City of San Antonio, and Reverend Dr. Kenneth Kemp, from Antioch Baptist Church. He's also a medical doctor at BAMC. He's served there for many years, 30 years now. Dr. Bridger was previously the Metro Health Director in the City of San Antonio, and a few years back, she became the Assistant City Manager. Dr. Kemp has served in various places and congregations around the nation, and is the head pastor at Antioch Baptist Church. Welcome, guys, to Pub Theology San Antonio Online Edition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, great. Right now, everybody is still trying to figure out this COVID-19 situation. And both of y'all have been on the front lines, working whether it's at BAMC or your congregation or with the city of San Antonio, working with the mayor and leadership and politicians and county commissioners and working groups. Dr. Bridger has been on the front lines. I worked with her about a year ago when the migrant a situation in San Antonio got pretty large, where we had a lot of legal migrants coming through San Antonio, and we got to know each other very well working at the Migrant Resource Center and the Migrant Overnight Shelter at Travis Park Church. And now she's heading one of the leaders in this crisis as well. So thank you for being here, Colleen. I do want you to start with us. Tell us kind of like where we are as a city when it comes to COVID-19. Where did we come from? And kind of give us your overview from the minute you've heard about the coronavirus to now. So just an overview, and you can kind of give us a little introduction of where we are.
So I think that where we are today is in much better shape than where we were a month ago. We are starting to see fewer and fewer new cases being diagnosed every day. Which is an indication that the social distancing and the stay home, stay safe order by the mayor and the judge have had their intended effect. So that's good. We're making good progress. It's funny, the majority of cities and counties across the United States first started worrying about COVID-19 in late February, early March. For San Antonio, however, we were one of 4 places selected to receive cohorts of evacuees, first from China, then from a number of cruise ships who were evacuated to San Antonio and kept on the military base and quarantined until they were no longer either they were done with the quarantine or until they were no longer sick. So we started working on our COVID-19 response in January in response to that. And we thought at the time that was a really big deal and that was a lot of work. And now we look back and we just laugh because that was nothing compared to what we've been doing since basically early March through now.
So when you first heard about the COVID-19, what went through your mind? Were you thinking this is going to be bad? This is not going to be so bad? Like what was your initial reaction when you first heard about it? And especially when it started arriving in the United States, how did you first respond?
So, it's hard when a novel virus comes from another country because you're not really comparing apples to apples. And so I will admit when we first started tracking COVID-19, my first thought was, well, yeah, it's bad in China, but they have much better, they have much higher population density. I'm not sure they have the same level of healthcare that we have in the United States. So it's probably, that's probably the worst case scenario. And we know it takes a while to travel from Asia to the United States. So we'll have time to prepare, make sure that we have everything set up and ready to go. So I think that I vastly underestimated the extent to which it would be a big, huge deal here in the United States as well.
Yeah, and I want to ask Dr. Kemp. Dr. Kemp, as a medical doctor and a head pastor, you know, there's not many few head pastors of large congregations and also a medical doctor. When you first heard about this, as a doctor, how did you process this information? And then how did you process it as a pastor for your congregation?
Well, when I first heard about it, as Dr. Bridget was talking about, I heard about cases in China, and then I heard it was coming to San Antonio. So my first thought was, oh my goodness, they're bringing this highly infectious disease to our city. And I did not know a lot about the disease, how it was transmitted. All I know was that it was from a novel coronavirus. And as a pulmonologist, I was aware of the previous coronavirus outbreaks with what was called SARS and MERS, different forms of severe respiratory illnesses associated with coronaviruses, but in other parts of the world. And I knew that these viruses could cause a significant amount of death and could spread rapidly. So I was greatly concerned that that might happen in our city.
And as a pastor, what was your thought when it came to your congregation, like, and the people that you serve? What was your first thought as a pastor?
Well, again, I was thinking about this when I first heard about it on the news, when, you know, the cruise ships and the evacuation of other parts of the world were coming to San Antonio. And I was wondering, how do I keep my congregation safe? Well, how do I keep my family safe? And then how do I keep my congregation safe? And my thought was, as long as they isolated at Lackland, then perhaps we're going to be okay. That was the thought. As long as it's isolated there and we do not get community spread, we'll probably be all right. So first thing I started doing was going to cdc.gov and trying to gather as much information that I could. Again, because this was information that was rapidly evolving. And I have some knowledge as a physician, obviously, but this is new information. And so I had to try to process it as quickly as possible to try to protect, again, my family and my church.
Yeah, I think we're all in that same situation. Dr. Bridger, tell us, what do you think the city has done really well? And what are some things that the city could have done better? So in this now 8 weeks of really dealing with this, maybe even longer, what has the city done really, really well? And when you look back and say, there's something that we could have done a little bit better, was it wearing masks? Was it, you know, are other solutions that we could have done? So what's your general overview of this last 8 weeks?
So I think that what the city did really well was a real focus on being open and transparent and reporting all of the data that we had available to us. And, you know, the first week was really rough with getting hundreds of requests from reporters, and they were all slightly different. And so I think one of the best decisions we made was to send out a survey to reporters saying, what are your priority data requests? We can't meet every single data request and effectively respond to this pandemic. We want to get you information, but we want to know what's the most important information. So going through that process with our press was super critical to making sure that we were sharing with them the information that they needed. It also helped us decide, well, if that's what they're interested in, that's probably what the community wants as well. And so we have ended up creating an absolutely incredible dashboard and data hub on our website that has, I have people from across the United States reaching out to me saying, I cannot believe how much data you're sharing. It's incredible. So, you know, we're one of the few municipalities who's reporting on race and ethnicity with cases and, you know, mapping it on the zip code level, so you can see where there are, you know, pockets of positives so that we can respond. So I think that's one thing that we did exceptionally well, and that I'm very proud of the work that the city did around that. I think another thing we did really well was we quickly realized that like with all health issues, there were disenfranchised populations who were not watching the news every night, who were not having access to the internet, and who just weren't getting all of the information we needed them to have. And so we deployed a, you know, traditional kind of boots on the ground strategy to get community health workers and other public health volunteers and staff to go into communities where we were seeing lower numbers for who was accessing the online screening tool, who was calling the hotline, who was scheduling appointments to be screened, where were our positives. So we created these maps that let us know, all right, in these 10 zip codes, we have lower than expected participation across the board. So let's deploy staff, boots on the ground, go into those communities and really work with the businesses, the faith communities, the council members in those areas and get the word out. What I think we didn't do super well, especially in the beginning, was, and I don't know how you fix this, but I heard a lot of concern from community kind of public health family about what exactly are you doing? And it's like asking somebody to tell you exactly what you're doing when you're trying to put out a fire, when you're in the middle of putting out that fire. And so having to stop and explain everything you're doing and why you're doing it and how it's based in science and why it's effective is hard while you're nose deep in it, trying to figure out exactly how to make this work. But if we could figure out a better way, almost like embedding reporters like the military does, embedding reporters into the response so that the reporters could report out on exactly what we're doing and why, and leave the public health people to the actual response, that would be something that we could think next time.
Well, that's a really good idea. I think that's a wonderful idea of trying to get embedding reporters into the situation to get more accurate information. You did mention something that I was going to bring up a little later, but we can talk about it now, and that is how communities of color have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 virus. Dr. Kemp, what have we learned from this, and what can we do? It may be too late now for this current situation, but what can we do in the future to lower that curve for populations of color?
Well, one of the things we know is that whenever there is a global pandemic, if you want to refer to this particular instance in that way, or if you have any kind of natural disaster, vulnerable populations, people of color, folks who are impoverished, or homeless and hungry, are the ones who are most affected. In fact, we could anticipate from the very beginning that those populations would be the ones who would feel the brunt of this. So how do we handle it in the future? Well, I think at the very beginning of a pandemic, if we ever have another one, God forbid, or any kind of natural disaster, is to recognize that those vulnerable populations will need additional attention and perhaps even additional resources to make it through the crisis. When you have people who can't stay home because they're in an industry that requires them to be present every day, people who don't have the option of taking care of their children at home because they have to work, or they don't have sufficient facilities for hand washing, and so on and so forth. We could go on and on and on about this. Those persons are the ones who are left out. And so our planning from the very beginning should include a recognition of those populations. I can say that the health transition team and the economic transition team looking to get San Antonio back open again, both teams are looking very carefully at including those marginalized communities.
That's right, and thank you for mentioning that. Dr. Kemp is on one of the transition teams to help slowly reopen San Antonio and look at the best ways and scientific ways to do this, and for all businesses and congregations. And I think you're the only pastor on there representing those congregations, so I'm glad you are, because you're the right person for the job, knowing your history and wisdom there.
Well, let me say one thing here. I am an anomaly because I'm the only one that's on both the health transition team and the economic transition.
Okay, I didn't know that. So you're on both.
It must have been a snafu on somebody's planning.
No,
I don't.
not a snafu. No, that's awesome. Well, I do want to remind people, if you do have a question for our guests tonight, you can post those in the comments below, and we'll see that, and we'll post those up when you can. So you can ask any question to Dr. Kemp or Dr. Bridger. We also, later on at 8 o'clock, have Pastor Ed Newton from Community Bible Church. He's going to be talking a little bit about the San Antonio Food Drive that'll be happening at his Northside congregation, I think, tomorrow. So that'll be coming up here on the program as well. Again, you're watching Pup Theology online in San Antonio, Texas, and we're glad you're here. Now, as we move forward in this together, how do we balance wisdom of what we can do versus what we should do? And so I really want y'all to speak on this differently. Maybe Dr. Kemp, you can talk about churches and how maybe they can respond, and Dr. Bridger, you can talk a little bit about city and the citizens and the businesses and all the things that might slowly open. So, as you know, the governor has allowed certain places to be open, restaurants at 25%. There's still businesses not allowed to be open until later in May. So as these things and restrictions are lifted, we can still respond differently and aren't forced to do anything. So again, the question is, how do you balance the wisdom of what we can do versus what we should do? So Dr. Bridger, when you speak for the citizens of San Antonio, what should we do?
I think that's a nice differentiation, Gavin. What you can do is starting to open up. You can, at lower densities, go to retail establishments, go to these. And, that's an component to getting the economy going again. And you have to start. What people should is or that they protect themselves as much as possible. So, for example, a healthy individual with underlying medical conditions, and you want to go to the move open and go. However, that you're 6 feet away from other people. You need about whether you want to wear a mask. Again, the government made that voluntary, and wearing a mask is actually more protective around you than it. But about this, are you touch? Should you wash your hands and meet theater? Yes, you should. And
hold on. Looks like we're having some technical difficulties here.
Uh-oh.
Bridger, we're gonna get with you real second. We're gonna check your internet maybe real fast. You're kind of freezing on us. So I will help you work on that. And we're gonna go to Dr. Kemp. So Dr. Kemp, when it comes to the wisdom of what we can do and what we should do, especially in the idea of church congregations, I'm a Methodist pastor. One of our founders, John Wesley, said the phrase "do no harm." Right, as a person of faith, as a Christian leader, we should aim to do no harm. Right. So how do we balance that? How do we do no harm as we slowly open our churches, our Bible studies, our recovery groups that are definitely needed for people who need to be in those recovery groups in person to receive care and treatment? So tell us a little bit about that and what we can do.
Well, it's interesting that you should mention the concept of do no harm. That's also one of the tenets of biomedical ethics. We call it non-maleficence, to do no harm. And then we also have the principle of beneficence, where we actively seek to do good. And then we also look at this issue of autonomy. In the medicine that we practice in this country, we highly value the ability of the individual to weigh in on what he or she will accept as medical care for them individually. So all those things have to come into play when you're looking at individual congregations. I think you have to consider beneficence, non-maleficence. You have to consider the autonomy of that church or that particular faith. There are some other things that we also looked at in the health transition team document, some guiding principles, and those things included whether we could make sure that people are protected by appropriate social distancing. We wanted to look at mitigation of risk. We wanted to look at the number of contacts, the intensity of contacts, and all of those things were issues that we talked about in the health transition team report, and also will segue into the economic transition team report. So when you look at the individual church, then what you can do is open. In fact, you could open even under the previous phase, according to our governor. There is this respect for the separation of church and state. However, we have to also consider in what we should do, maintaining the health and safety of our congregation. And so we need to look at those things that we can do to reduce the intensity of contacts, the number of contacts, and to mitigate other factors that may be associated with the transmission of COVID-19. So everybody, I believe, needs to do an individual assessment of their own church, their own synagogue, their own mosque, and see how do we maintain the distancing that is required. Can we do that? Can we make sure that our congregants, our worshipers, our attendees will be wearing masks if that's appropriate, or gloves, or can we screen them as they come into the sanctuary? We need to also screen our employees, our staff, to make sure that no one who is showing signs of an infection or who has had symptoms is in that space where a lot of people gather. That's just a reasonable thing to do. The other thing is to consider how do you control the traffic? How do you keep people from congregating even as they're going in and out of the sanctuary, in between services? All of those things need to be considered when you look at what you should do, knowing that your priority should be the protection of your people. And I've said this to my congregation. I appreciate what the mayor and what the county judge are doing. I certainly respect our governor, but what matters to me most and above everything else is how are my people, my church, going to be protected. And so we're not opening on Sunday. I know we can, but we ain't. Okay. Yeah. And we're going to make sure that we assess the situation. I thank God for Dr. Bridger and those persons who have been working to make sure that we keep a very close eye on the indicators in our community. When we see a clear and consistent and a persistent, if you will, reduction in cases, and in the health transition team report, we talked about a 14-day period of consistent reduction in the number of cases before we move to the next phase. Well, when I see that and I'm satisfied with that, then we'll move toward the next phase. But that's my take on it. We can, but we're not, because I don't think we should.
Yeah, and I'll get to Dr. Bridger again to say what you were saying previously, because I think you're connected to internet now, like a hardwire.
Yeah, I have a hard wire now, so hopefully
you look good. You're nice and
came to the rescue.
There you go. But Dr. Kemp, a lot of people, and I should say this, some people in the faith-based community have a real skepticism of science, right? They don't trust it. They see it as kind of the enemy in some way. I saw, and I'm actually saying a quote from a pastor here in San Antonio. I'll leave him nameless, but he was interviewed about meeting. Church was meeting during this crisis, and he says to the reporter, "Baby, I'm covered in the blood of Jesus." Right. So how do we reach people of faith that have this deep held belief that they're going to be taken care of because of their spirituality? How do we get them to trust science more and not see it as some type of enemy or something that we always have to speak out against? As a medical doctor and a person of faith and a head pastor of a church, how have you balanced this in your life, and how can this help us in this time right now? I think that's a good question for Pub Theology.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll try to keep my response brief, because I could talk a long time about this.
It's okay. When you go off solo mode, I'll tell you that's your conclusion.
Let's talk about it personally. Personally, I had to deal with the issue of how do I reconcile medicine with ministry? How do I reconcile science with faith? And what I found out is that the two complement each other. When I first acknowledged my call to the ministry, I thought all my colleagues were going to think I was crazy. And some of them did, to be honest with you. Some of them thought I was out of my mind. However, the majority of them were extremely impressed. And what I found is that medicine informs my ministry, and ministry informs my medicine. They really go together. And from the Christian perspective, now we know there are different faith walks out there, but from the Christian perspective, the way I deal with this is I look at the example of Jesus, who was told by Satan to throw himself off a pinnacle. You're Jesus, right? And the angels will bear you up lest you dash your foot against a stone. Just do it. And Jesus told the devil that you should not tempt the Lord your God. In other words, don't put God in a situation where you say, okay, well, God, take care of me, even though I'm walking into the middle of this fire. You just take care of me. Now, if you don't have to walk in the fire, don't think that God is obligated to take care of you. He can, but that doesn't mean he will. So, the way I look at it is, if there is clear and present danger, clear and present indications of danger, then you don't necessarily have to put yourself in that position to try God to keep you. Now, that's the way I look at it. Now, here's the other thing: is there's clear evidence that the transmission of this virus occurs in confined spaces with high contacts. That's clear. There is no doubt about it. All right. We may not know if it comes from touching surfaces, but we know if you get a bunch of people together in a confined space, people will transmit the virus.
That sounds like church to me.
Yeah, it's just that's there, man. And so I'm saying to myself, why would I, as a pastor, expose my people to that? And so from a personal responsibility sake, I say I cannot do it, because I cannot be responsible for an outbreak of COVID-19 that started at the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, and then you and everybody else in San Antonio will hear about it on the news.
Yeah, it definitely reminds us what is sacred, right? What is
Yeah.
truly sacred are the people and the lives that we are serving at our churches, right? Those are what's sacred. Any tradition that we might have that we think that's some sacred cow that we always, participate in, like oh, we have to do this on a Sunday. We have to do this in our service. We have to say this prayer. We have to do communion this way. We realize really what's really sacred is the community around us, right? The beloved community, and how to keep them safe. So thank you for those words.
Can I say one more thing else?
Yeah, totally. No, Pastor, you got the floor.
I just told my congregation Wednesday Bible study. I said, we're not going to rush into a building that's burning. Okay, now that's a little extreme, right? Because we're not necessarily burning, but there's indication that the charcoal is still hot. So if the building is burning, would you say I'm covered by the blood of Jesus and I'm just going to walk in the building that's burning down?
No, that's good. Pastor, a months ago, October, actually feels like yesterday, but October, right after we did our migrant ministry, a part of our building's roof collapsed, actually a huge section. I don't know if you saw that on the news. I'm 100% confident. I think I told our congregation not to meet that Sunday, right? Like it wasn't safe, right? Like we have floods, the roof is collapsed. There's a lot of danger. We didn't just say, everybody go into the building and let's just do this because we're covered by the blood of Jesus. We met outside in the park. We found a new way. Dr. Bridger found a building that the homeless could use for us, and we all made it work, right? We found new ways to do community together. And I think that's what we got to figure out. Even when we're tempted to now start meeting, we're going to have to be very cautious, especially as people of faith, how to do that. So Dr. Bridger, thanks for being back. Crystal clear. Again, tell us a little bit about, as citizens of San Antonio, when it comes to our businesses, our movie theaters, I heard you mention that, wearing masks, not wearing mask, gloves. What are the things that we should do versus that we can do?
So should do, because clearly the governor has opened some stuff up and has said, here's what you could do if you wanted to. For me, I think anybody who goes out, they need to make sure that they maintain that social distance. That is the number one priority for me. If you can only do one thing, keep that 6 feet between you and everybody else you're around. The second most important thing you can do is wash your hands. And if you don't have access to warm water and soap, then hand sanitizer is a decent second choice, but really washing your hands 20 to 30 seconds with warm soapy water is the best thing you can do. And then just avoid touching your face. There's a lot of debate about mask, not mask. Masks don't hurt as long as you're taking them off correctly. I cannot tell you how many people I've seen go to take the mask off by just grabbing the front and pulling it and then not washing their hands. So they've taken all of anything that's accumulated on the mask and put it on their hands. So that's not cool. Don't wear a mask like that. But if you're wearing a mask, wear it correctly. Don't pull it down over your nose. Keep it covering your nose and your mouth. And be smart about where you go. Don't go into places with a lot of people where it's impossible to keep that 6 foot distance. Now, that's for healthy average people. If you are somebody who is over the age of 65, or you are somebody with pretty serious chronic medical conditions, you should still stay home. Just because you can go to the movies right now doesn't mean you should. So for those folks, I just don't see any reason why they need to, especially the 65 and over. That's where we're seeing the highest death rates is in those older populations, the more serious infections among those older populations, especially if they have the chronic underlying medical conditions. So If my mom were here and, you know, she's 75, I would say, Mom, you are still sheltering in place. It doesn't make any sense. It's not smart for you to go out and expose yourself to COVID-19 because it is still circulating in the community.
Yeah, that's really good. You know, I there's some things I always want to do, like I can do, but I shouldn't, right? I shouldn't try to overly touch my face. I shouldn't try to, you know, be tempted to give somebody a handshake, like
Yeah, or a hug.
yeah,
I miss
or
the
a hug.
hug, but
I
yeah.
can do those things. I just shouldn't do those things. We do have a
Yeah.
question from Sandra here. I'm going to show this on the screen. She says, could the guest speak on how the homeless are assessing a place to clean their hands and get masks? The only public accessible restroom in the Portaloo between the McDonald's and the Casa Rio. There are so many of them between the Tobin Center and the Pearl. So yeah, how can the homeless access some of these places to clean their hands? And let Dr. Bridger answer that.
Well, we have been worried about the homeless from the beginning, and we have set up hand washing stations and hubs for food and other services for the homeless throughout the city. I think on any given day, there are at least 4 to 6 of these hubs that are operating and providing food, clean clothing. Some of them provide opportunities for showers, including the ability to access restrooms, hand washing, hygiene kits. The other thing that we're doing is allowing people who wish to move from the Haven for Hope campus to a hotel. So we have secured about 400 hotel rooms where especially those folks who are at high risk, so either you know, they're older or they have underlying medical conditions, they can go to a hotel and reduce the density at the homeless shelter and decrease their exposure to others in that confined environment. We've also arranged for our paramedics to provide COVID-19 testing to any homeless individual who presents at any of these hubs and says that they have symptoms and would like a test. We've tested dozens, and so far none of them have come back positive, thank goodness. But it's definitely on our radar screen, definitely a concern.
Yeah, and it's been a great privilege to be one of those organizations that do support a city hub. The Cortisone Ministries and Travis Park Church help run the homeless hub in downtown San Antonio near Santa Rosa Hospital. You can learn all about that. And thank you for your question.
And can I just add one more thing? There's at least one other public restroom that I'm aware of, which is in the main plaza on the other end of town to the one referenced by the person with the question.
Sure.
So let's not forget that there are public restrooms there as well.
Yeah, and there's also public restrooms in the city parking garage at Travis Street and St. Mary's, right across the street from Travis Park Church. So there are a few. There probably needs to be more, and that's something that we can probably work on in the future to get more public restrooms for those in need. So we have another question here, and I'm going to show it from, let's see, Jessica Weaver. Thanks for joining us. She says, will the city consider a committee that is focused on youth and children, or is there a committee that already exists focusing on how we will at some point serve children and youth in schools and community programming? Thank you for that question. And we'll let anybody answer if you know those from the committees you serve on.
Well, Gavin, you and I serve on the Social Services Committee. Sorry, Dr. Kemp. So just real brief. So Gavin and I serve on the Social Services Committee, and children's issues have come up as part of that. And we are working together on making sure that we kind of double down on our safety net services that we have for kids, recognizing that they're at a higher risk of abuse and neglect when they are out of school. Domestic violence is a higher risk for families when they are all together for such a long period of time with no ability to leave the house. So we are trying to do what we can to make sure that we're doubling down on that safety net.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Kemp, you were about to say something.
Yes, I was going to say that on the health transition team, there was a special consideration to the issues of children, and particularly on the economic transition team, there is great emphasis on how to get children back to school, but get them back to school safely, and also how to protect their teachers and the adults who have to oversee them. So I'm not aware of a committee or team that's doing exclusively children, but the issues of children figure prominently in the transition plans.
Well, thank you for that. And another person has asked, or Sandra has asked again, where do we find a list of where the hubs are? Those are listed in all the different ministries and organizations that are supporting those. You can find that list. But I think at covid19.sanantonio.gov, you can get a general list of where those hubs are. We'll make sure it's on there, along with the homeless hotline that we'll put up here in a second. So that information is getting out there. It's always changing in some ways. So we always try to update that as fast as possible. You can also go to Corazon Ministries website and also see that PDF of all the different locations of homeless hubs and places to receive food. And to be fair, on our Instagram today, we posted a picture of a worker taking a great sunset shot of their building, one of the buildings in downtown. And she is one of our clients at Corazon, but she's not homeless, right? She's working. She just needs services. And it reminds us that people who go to these hubs are not always homeless. There are people who need warm meals. They're the working poor. So again, these homeless hubs are not always for people who maybe be on the street homeless, but those who need food for many different reasons. So I do want to say that. Hey, Chad, thanks, Chad, for being here. Chad just said thank you for the doctors and for us for being here. We're actually in Chad's place right now at Arsenal Church. He's got this amazing studio. So Chad, thank you for making us look really good online. I do want to transition a little bit from talking about COVID and really talking about you two. Normally, we wouldn't talk about a crisis at Pup Theology. We'd be actually talking about your lives and your callings and what you do. And so I want to go, Dr. Bridger has to go here in a few minutes. So I really want to talk to Dr. Bridger, then we'll go to Dr. Kemp. Where did you get first called to do what you do? I know you've served at different nonprofits. You've done a lot of stuff in healthcare and Metro Health. Where did you get this bug to do what you're doing, and what led you to do city work?
Yeah, I became a health director. So actually running the health department at the tender age of 28.
Wow.
In North Carolina. I was in rural North Carolina. And it was one of those things where I was sure I was not qualified to do the job, but I thought that the interview would be a good experience. And I went into the interview in this beautiful Piedmont County of rural North Carolina in the fall. The leaves were just absolutely gorgeous with fall colors. And I walked in and there were, 15 people on the interview panel, the entire Board of Health, the city manager, all of those folks. And I felt like, kind of God took a hold of me and said, you will answer all of these questions perfectly. And I'm thankful that he did because they hired me. And that was in 1997. And I have worked in public health as a local health official since then. So that's a long time. What we used to say in North Carolina is that the average tenure of a local health director is about 5 years. Because it's, there's some politics involved in the job. It's a hard job, but I love it. I absolutely love it. So I had an opportunity to come to San Antonio at a point in my life where both of my kids were grown and they were adulting, as they say. And my husband and I found ourselves relatively young empty nesters and wanted an adventure. And so we came to San Antonio for me to run the health department. It was our first experience in a big city. And I have absolutely loved it. It was a phenomenal experience. Had an opportunity to move up with the new city manager into the city manager's office with him and his team. And that's been another really great opportunity to learn about, homeless and the Migrant Resource Center and all of that. But my heart will always be in public health.
It's great. And you mentioned North Carolina. There was actually a connection between all three of us. All at some point, we've all lived in North Carolina. I went there seminary there for 4 years. Dr. Kemp served there in Fayetteville as a medical doctor, and then back again as a pastor at a church that I read. And you got your master's there, and grew up there. Grew up in North Carolina.
No, my husband grew up in North Carolina, and so we got married in 1990 and moved to North Carolina shortly thereafter. And so I was there until we moved to San Antonio.
Wow. And is the Metro Health what drew you to San Antonio?
Yes. All
right, and we're glad that happened.
Absolutely.
I brag about Dr. Bridger all the time, and she hates this. I'll skip the Migrant Resource Center one, but I can't say this one because this is new. About 2 weeks before COVID became really serious, I think this is early March, probably late February. I was driving away from my church, Dr. Kemp, and we were in downtown, and there was somebody near the courthouse, possibly a man who was homeless, definitely down on his luck. And I slowed down thinking, okay, maybe I should stop. And I see this woman walk across the street wearing a dress and some flip-flops, and she stops and she starts talking to the man very tenderly, like total eye connection, making a connection with the person. And I pull over, and it's our own assistant city manager meeting the needs of our citizens. And I have a picture of it, actually. I will not post it right now, but
thank you, Gavin.
We were blessed to have a person of such a compassion leading this city, and also in this time of uncertainty and what we're trying to face as a city together with COVID-19. So, Dr. Kemp, how did you find your calling first as a medical doctor and then a pastor?
Well, I grew up in the church. I grew up in the Baptist church, but my grandparents were Methodists. They were African Methodist Episcopal, and so I learned a little bit about Baptist and Methodist doctrine. And then my pastor of the little church I grew up in was out of the Pentecostal church, so I had a little bit of everything mixed up in there. But I did not want to be a pastor. I didn't want to be a preacher. I was what they felt was academically gifted, and so I wanted to just go ahead and do what I wanted to do, and didn't really want to be involved in ministry. I just felt like it wasn't for me, and so I went on and did my work in school. But I always had this underlying gnawing feeling that I should be doing more in the church. And it was not until after I completed my residency in internal medicine, I spent a year as chief of medical residence. When actually it was during the year I was a chief medical resident, I just finally gave up and said, this is what the Lord has called me to do. And I remember telling the congregation when I accepted the call that I chose medicine and I chose the military. I was in the Army at the time, but God chose me. And so I have to do what the Lord has compelled me to do. And when I did that, I actually had a peace in my life that I had not had before. It was as if I had finally given up to the calling that the Lord had on my life, and that peace that came gave me the ability to continue and to be satisfied that I was doing what He had called me to do. I was concerned about what people would think. I imagine it happens in anyone who accepts a call to ministry. But I was particularly concerned about how my medicine colleagues would think of me. But I learned more than anything else that there is a complementary nature between medicine and military, military, and the medicine and the ministry. And so I put it all together, and the Lord just made it work for me. I never intended really to be a senior pastor. I just wanted to be in ministry, to minister to the people of God as God gave me opportunity. But the Lord had different plans. So here I am.
That's great, and we're glad. And you serve one of the most amazing, involved community churches on the east side of San Antonio. I go there very once a year, probably for your kickoff for MLK week.
Mhm.
We can't forget that Martin Luther King was a preacher. Uh,
That's right.
that's right, and he was an activist. He did a lot of good things, but before that, he was a Baptist minister. So thank you for what you do in our community. We're going to keep you on here for a little bit because I have one more question for you before we
Okay.
bring on Pastor Ed Newton from Community Bible Church. He's just now about to join us.
Mhm.
We have one question that I just got texted, and that is, what are the health risks? And as a committee, in your committee of reopening San Antonio, you must have to ask this. What are the health risks of an inherent recession? So we talk about the health risks of COVID-19, but what are the
Mhm.
health risks of just continuing this economic recession? And how do we balance those two?
Well, that's an interesting question. They're two different things. The economy and health, although they do go hand in hand. Clearly, persons who have challenges in paying bills, challenges in going to the doctor, um, so they don't get proper health care, they don't get proper nutrition, then of course they're going to be more vulnerable to illness, whether that's an infectious disease or just deterioration and chronic medical illness. So a poor economy will affect health. That's very, very true. Um, we have to balance things. You certainly can open up a lot of businesses, open up a lot of nonprofit areas. People can congregate in large numbers and do what we need to do to open up the economy. But I also say to that situation, there will be no need of an economy in Texas or anywhere else if millions of us are dead or dying or sick. So you got to prioritize, I believe, prioritize health. And then with that, consider economy as well.
Yeah. So when you hear people say, well, there's going to be a lot of suicides now, there's going to be a lot of other things like that. Do you think those statements have merit, or is it a lot of people talking because they don't understand really what the death toll could be of COVID-19? The numbers might be lower in some cities than we thought because of
Yeah.
social distancing is working. So how do you balance when you hear statements like that? Okay, people are going to be really, depression is going to increase, that the health of others, it's just going to be just as bad or even worse than COVID-19. Is that a true statement, or is that just kind of exaggerated?
I don't know to what extent people will commit suicide
Yeah.
because of a bad economy. My gut feeling is you would not get a million of them to do it. I wouldn't think so, but I don't know. There are
No.
now over a million cases of COVID-19 in the United States. There are
Wow.
over 57,000 people who died. And that number keeps going up every day. So I don't think you can trade one off versus the other. We got to deal with what we know, and we know that this disease, this COVID-19 disease, spreads rapidly, and it kills people because we don't have a sufficient treatment or a sufficient mitigation strategy. We do have a mitigation strategy in that we are sheltering in place and we're staying home and working safe. There are some benefits to that, but we take the reins off of that. We don't have a vaccination. Um, we don't have a good way of controlling its spread. So, this disease, this infectious disease, can affect millions. It already has. Now, whether you're going to get millions of people to commit suicide because the economy is turned down, I don't think so. But
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah,
say.
I agree. And also when I hear lists of other things that, oh, this is worse than COVID, car wrecks, or, lists, people said different things. Well, I think, a lot of those things aren't contagious, right? Like, this is something that's unknown, that is contagious, that we don't have treatment for. So we really can't compare it the same way. and and put a list together that what might be worse. So thank you for your wisdom there. And I do want to say thank you to Dr. Bridger from the city of San Antonio for coming on earlier, along with Dr. Kemp. Stay with us, Dr. Kemp, because we are about to bring on another pastor here in San Antonio, Pastor Ed Newton from Community Bible Church. And we're going to add you to the screen. Ed, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you, Gavin and Dr. Kemp. Always good to see you as usual.
Good to see you, sir.
Ed is the pastor. He's also a doctor. He got his doctorate of ministry. So everybody's a doctor here. I'm not, but we have Dr. Ken, Dr. Kemp, and Dr. Bridger, all different types of doctors, Ph.D, MDs, doctors of ministries. So it's Dr. Pup Theology night. Ed is a pastor of a congregation of 27,000 people here in San Antonio. So we were speaking a little bit about now that the governor is allowing congregations to meet again. Ed, what is CBC doing right now? And before we get to your food drive, it's a little talk about what is CBC doing now going forward, what they've done in the past to protect many people in your congregation from catching COVID-19.
Gavin, that is the $1 million question. And for us, we are not choosing to reconvene worship gatherings until we get more data and we continue to look at some of the scenarios and situations that our governor is giving us. There's some stipulations around what a gathering looks like. And so we just feel as if that trying to conduct a worship service along these types of stipulations is going to be very challenging. And at this point, we're just really putting our thumb to the pulse of what our people are saying. And there's a little bit of a hesitancy right now to reconvene in a public worship gathering. So what we're doing is our live stream has been working well. We have virtual groups continuing to thrive. And so for us, we're specifically just choosing to wait to see this phase 1 approach that our governor has, as Friday, the shelter in place will be lifted. And so we just want to give some space to see what social reorientation looks like amongst our community.
Yeah, and Dr. Kemp was saying earlier, he's on the transition team for the city, and he was talking about a 14-day waiting period. If you have 14 consistent days of numbers going down, that gives us a little bit more confidence to continue adding programs back at our church, right? And there'll probably be a sliding scale there too. Like we'll start small groups back up, we'll start certain things, and slowly in the next few months get to maybe, hopefully, God willing, to back where we can meet together as a full congregation or a church on the Sunday morning, or all the different programmings that we do. Downtown, our biggest service is with the homeless in San Antonio. We have about 600 people. So, we have to consider what's the best for that. So everybody has to figure out how to slowly open and do what's best. Ed, tell us a little bit about how your congregation has been helping during this crisis, and tell us a little bit about what's happening. I believe tomorrow. Is it tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, tell us what's happening tomorrow, and also other things you've been doing in the community to help. And we'll ask that question to Dr. Kemp as well.
Yeah, we much like everybody else in the San Antonio city is so proud of our food bank, and I'm a huge fan of all our ministry partners in the city and organizations that are on the front lines, and huge shout out to all of them that have been serving in the trenches. But Eric Cooper and the director, as the director of the food bank, has done an outstanding job. And the food bank is a bright shining light in our city, and actually has become a tremendous example to our nation in the food bank industry. And so for us, it's an effort to come alongside the San Antonio Food Bank specifically. Tomorrow, there's a mega drive. There's been several mega drives at the Alamo Dome. And for those that are familiar with this, that's encompassing of all of Bexar County, and then also a little bit outside of those jurisdictions. So what we're trying to do is, in partnership with the San Antonio Food Bank, our church has completely staffed it. I'm so proud of our church, as every pastor is. I know Dr. Kemp's proud of his people as well. We made a request on Saturday night at 5 service, needing about 150 volunteers from our church. And in 19 minutes, it was completely filled. And so this is going to be an incredible opportunity for us to love on people in our city And so think about it from this perspective. There's an idea that people may have that there might not be food poverty in people that live above 1604, but that's not true. There are people that are in some very difficult situations because, as you guys have already talked about, the economy has been difficult for people to work through in these days. And so there are people that are driving from the north side all the way down to the Alamo Dome. And so this will be that midway point for a lot of people in the northern part of our city that may need a food replenishment to come to let's just say a closer location to maybe where they're at.
No, that's good. You know, a lot of times we think people who need food might be in certain parts of the city, but that's not necessarily true. They're all over, not even parts of the North San Antonio. This could be, they could be coming from Bernie. They could be coming from way up north on 281 in the Spring Branch area, New Braunfels. And so like they're coming down, and your church is very well located and as a parking lot that can really do well to serve. So thank you. The website is below, sanantoniofoodbank.org. So safoodbank.org. I can tell you making donations to the food bank goes a very, very long way. You can always give food there. That's great. But when you give money to the food bank, they can buy much more food. And it's where a lot of organizations like ours buys the food to cook for the homeless. We get our food from the food bank. So when you give to the food bank, it goes not only to the food bank and Great Citizens of San Antonio, it goes all over to all the other organizations that work with the food bank to provide these services. So again, we'll keep with us here, Pastor Ed. Dr. Kemp, what has your church done on the east side to help with the community in during COVID-19?
Well, we also work with the San Antonio Food Bank. We unfortunately have been unable to do the kind of distribution of food like we would normally do on the east side because of some restraints that we have. Typically, we would every Wednesday serve as a hub for a number of people who were homeless, hungry. They didn't necessarily have to be homeless, just hungry. But some of that had to be cut back because of concern about COVID-19. But those people still are homeless, still hungry, and they still need assistance. One of our persons who was the coordinator of our food bank effort, Sister Erna Baker, passed away due to complications of COVID-19.
Oh, so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, she's the only one of our congregation that we know of that's passed from COVID-19. We don't know how she contracted it, but we do know up until the global pandemic was declared, she was still doing food bank work. And so we certainly want to thank God for Sister Baker, and we pray for her family. But those are the kinds of things that we're doing. One of the things that also I think it's important for us to remember is that we have to try to maintain some sense of normalcy for the congregation. So we've attempted to provide virtual worship services in a manner similar to what we would have had with regular worship. So those things that we would have done in person, we've just converted them to virtual worship services. And also to remember our children and our mothers. Children get ready to graduate, and so we're organizing a baccalaureate service for a virtual baccalaureate service for our children, and also a virtual celebration of our mothers. That's just some of the things. There are a whole lot more things.
Well, we praise God for the life of Sister Baker, right? Sister Baker.
Yeah, Mr. Baker.
And what a life well lived, and always there for other people, right? Serving food bank, serving people on the east side. So a life well lived, and we celebrate that. Even in the pain, and the hurt, and the fear we have, we can sit with this fear and this pain like a troubled friend, and kind of learn from it and grow from it, and praise God that this suffering makes us stronger. So thank you for those mentioning her in the service that she gave to our community. Ed, when people have come to you really frustrated and fearful about the COVID crisis, maybe they've been affected by it personally. Maybe they've been they have friends or family. Maybe they're hurt. They're local economy is, their business has been hurt. How do you give people hope when there's so much fear happening all around us? And even when this COVID fear passes in some point, there's still going to be this lasting effect on this. So how do you preach Christian hope as a person of faith when there's so much uncertainty?
It's a great question, Gavin. I think the first response is, as pastors, we're so quick to have an answer. And the Lord's given us 2 ears and 1 mouth just to remind us we got to listen twice as much before we choose to speak. And I think we have to be very careful in being quick to give answers at this moment. I think more than anything else, we know that Jesus is the answer. We know that he's hope. But at this moment, sometimes we got to be Jesus with skin on and hands and feet on his behalf, listening and caring and seeking to be compassionate towards the needs of what people may be sharing. I'm trying not to ever use words in conversations, period. Sometimes I slip up and say things that may sound insensitive. And what I mean by that is to go, like phrases like, I know how you feel. I've completely tried to stop using that word. I've just tried to go, I can't imagine what that feels like, but would you help me understand? And I've found that it's been really encouraging to people for them just to have an opportunity just to share their struggle or maybe put into words what they may be feeling. And then at that moment, I'm developing relational equity. Relational equity doesn't come from a title or the fact that I'm a pastor of a church, but I care. And so it's in those moments of trying to develop a relationship, a bridge is built. And then I take into passages. I'm so thankful that there's over 365 verses in the Bible that say, do not fear. So just this overarching reality that God just wants us to walk in confidence in the fact that if he can come back from the dead, he can calm anxiety. If he came back from the dead, then he can walk with us through the valley. I'm so thankful even for Psalm 23. It's a reminder that Jesus walks with us through the darkest of moments, and that being a follower of Jesus doesn't mean that we're exempt from hardship or trial or tribulation. Being a follower of Jesus means that we have someone that walks with us through hardship, trial, or tribulation. And that's what I'm reminding them, that Jesus has never given up on them. Here's the big phrase. Jesus is not the cause of COVID-19. He's the comfort in the midst of COVID-19. And that's what I've been saying. Just run to him, find hope in him, and surround yourself with people that will encourage you, be here for you. Don't isolate yourself. Choose to put people around you that will speak life into you. And so if I could say anything to anybody right now, I would say this, that Jesus is he's in the storm with you. And sometimes he speaks, peace be still to the storm. And then sometimes he speaks, peace be still to us, and calms our heart in the middle of the storm. But the key denominator is hearing the voice of Jesus. There's so much noise happening right now, and our feeds are filled with messages. But my prayer is that people would hear the voice of Jesus, say that he loves them. He died. If he loved them enough to die for them, he loved them enough to carry them through this situation.
Well, that's great. And thanks for Psalm 23. At our church, we sometimes, and most of the time, do the Christian calendar, which goes through the New Testament and the Old Testament in a 3-year period, hits most of the Bible in those 3 years. And this week's Psalm is actually Psalm 23. I don't know if you knew that. Usually community Bible and Baptist people, they don't do the Christian calendar, but you nailed it. See, that's why it's there. That's why the Christian liturgy is there. But Psalm 23 is what our church is preaching on this week. So there you go. You pulled it out. See that connection right there.
I wish I could take credit for that, but I cannot.
So again, Dr. Kemp, how would you offer somebody hope? And also take a little bit beyond, if somebody is not of the Christian faith or no faith at all, right? How do we still see hope during a time of fear?
Well, I think if we say segue out of the Christian faith in particular, just talk about faith in general, I think one of the things we need to continue to remind people is that we're in this thing together. We're Americans, we're Texans, we're San Antonians, and COVID-19 does not discriminate. It has affected all of us, young, old, rich, not so rich, um, affluent, not affluent, and we all are in it together. But what we can hold on to is that because we are a people of resilience, um, a people of determination, that we will get through it together as well. Those of us who serve Jesus, who find our faith walk in Him, know, as Pastor Newton has said, that He is our hope. Um, but if you don't serve Jesus, you do know that there's somebody that has an authority that's higher than that of the mayor, the governor, the president, who is indeed watching over us. And so that's what I try to encourage people in, to know that there is a hope beyond where we are right now, and that we will get through it. We will get through it. It may take some time, but we'll get through it. And I also acknowledge that some of us are going to have to experience the burn. I preached about that on Sunday. That you're gonna feel the burn. You might even get bitten, like Paul did uh, on the island of Malta after the shipwreck. But we got to learn how to shake it off. So we can keep moving.
That's good. That's good. And hope's a funny thing. We say hope so oftentimes with words like faith and love. It just kind of runs together. Faith, hope, and love. And we're like, what's the difference between the three? I don't know. They're kind of all the same, right? But hope is different. It's yet to come, right? It's something that we long for, and that connects us all. All human beings are in this together. One thing that's really unusual about this COVID crisis, when there's another crisis, like when a hurricane hits the Gulf Coast and people need food, people from the nation can come around and send food to a certain region, right? Well, this whole world is affected by this virus. So it's almost, that's what makes it so tough to receive so much food for certain populations, because this whole place is dealing with this at the same time. But in a weird way, that gives me this weird sense of peace, that we're all in this together, that we're experiencing this regardless of borders, regardless of political views, regardless of where we live or how much money we have or don't have, how old we are. Really, this is affecting everyone. And that in that way should unite us. And that actually gives me hope, because I have hope that we can come together and do the best we can and create the common good for one another. And maybe this is a good practice for us in some ways that we usually don't have the opportunity to do. And it's challenging. I think oftentimes we're tempted to huddle back in our groups and go back to our political leanings and point the finger and try to make sense of it all. But really, what gives me hope is that we really can't do that. We have to listen to each other. Like you said, Pastor Ed, we have to maybe talk a little slower, rely less on all the things that we thought were sacred before, and find new ways to live in community with one another. And maybe that brings a sense of peace. Maybe that brings a new way to live with one another when this last couple of years and these generations before have been so hectic. So I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. Ed, everybody shared a little bit about how they got called into their jobs. Dr. Bridger talked about how she got called into healthcare. Dr. Kemp talked about how he got called into medicine and also being a pastor. What led you to who you are? How did you land in San Antonio? And before that, how did you get into ministry?
Well, I'm one. I was listening to Dr. Kemp's story, and I was like, man, that brother's story is a whole lot cooler than mine. I promise you that. So for me, it's gonna be underwhelming. But I've always said this: every God story is a great story. And for me personally, I'm an only child of two deaf parents, and I don't know if you know that or not, Gavin. But both my parents are deaf. My mom's got cerebral palsy, so I grew up in a home where sign language was my primary language, and so fluent in sign language, and grew up in Orlando. And there was a season where we were in government subsidized housing. It was called the Center for Independent Living. So it was an apartment complex where all my neighbors were handicapped. And So that environment shaped me and sculpted me, and in the fire kind of formed me into who I am, and to see people in a different way, in a very opportunistic way, from the standpoint of every person. So disabilities to me are not disabilities. That is, my mom and dad may be labeled as being disabled, but they're quite able. They just do it in a different way. And so, so I've learned through seeing the world through their eyes, how to see people. And here's a phrase that really just has stood out to me, that oftentimes we walk into rooms to be seen versus to walk into rooms to see. And my mom and dad taught me that.
Wow.
And I'm grateful for that. And so my mom and dad are alive. My mom's in an assisted living facility, and my dad's, both their health's not doing too well, and they're in Florida. I tried to move them here when I came to San Antonio, but Dr. Kemp would probably testify to this. The allergies here in San Antonio are not for all people. And so they want to go back to Florida, where I'm from originally. But I came to know Jesus as a high school kid. Didn't grow up in church because most churches don't really have a deaf ministry, and came to know Jesus in just a supernatural way and everybody comes to know Jesus through a supernatural way. But for me, it was on my 15th birthday, and I was almost expelled out of middle school for various reasons that not proud of. And as a freshman in high school, on my 15th birthday, my mom and dad tell me that there was a church that has an interpreter, and we're going. And the only time we ever went to church was Christmas and Easter, because that was the only time that churches had interpreters. And that night, they just so happened to have an interpreter on a Wednesday night. My life was unraveling at the seams. Came to know Jesus. And then my senior year of high school, by being involved in a youth group, my 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade year, felt God called me to ministry as a high school senior. Long story short, I played basketball in high school and got an opportunity to play college basketball down in South Florida at a Christian college, and got some ministry training there. It's where I met my wife. And my wife, Stephanie, we've been married 21 years. We got 4 kids, 16, 15, 14, and 12. And so I'm just trying to condense this, Gavin, because I know you're running out of time. But went into full-time ministry in 97, 98, and then went into evangelism in 2003. So I was an associate pastor. I was a youth pastor, college pastor, evangelism pastor, a lot of different roles. But in 2003, I became a full-time evangelist because God just was crazy. A story for another day. But did that for 13 years. And about 11 years ago, I get a phone call from Community Bible Church, and Pastor Robert, his son's name was Chris, and Chris called me and said, "Hey man, we found you on YouTube, and we'd like for you to come speak at our men's conference." Well, I did that 6 years in a row, and developed a relationship with the men of the church at CBC, and then began to fill in for Pastor Robert. But once more, I was a traveling evangelist. And then in 2015, Pastor Robert called me in October and said, and straight up, Pastor Kemp, this is what he said to me. He goes, "God told me you're to be the pastor of CBC." And I started laughing, because Robert and I had a kind of a joking relationship. And I was like, "Come on, Pastor Robert. Like, I've never been a pastor of a church before." I was like, "Guys like me start churches with 20 people, and 16 of them are your own family." and he said, "No, man, God told me you're the guy." So that was October, and I started January 2016. Lived in the Hampton Inn across the street from the church for 6 months.
Nice.
And
hey, they did your sheets and laundry every day. That can't be bad.
Hey, listen, man, I learned how to make a waffle at the Hampton Inn about 17 different ways. I promise you.
Wow, that's great. And you've been here now for about 4 years.
Yeah, 4 years. 4.5, almost 4.5. So.
Wow, and thanks you for your leadership and the trust you've built with other pastors in town, and also with the San Antonio mayor. I know that when this happened, one of the first phone calls he made to try to figure out what's the pulse of the community, the faith-based community, he reached out to you because he trusts your wisdom and your guidance. And the same thing, he put Dr. Kemp on both transition teams to be the voice for pastors here in San Antonio. So thank you for that. real fast, I do want to say that I want to give Ed one more shot. Tell us the exact timing. Tell us a little bit what's happening at your church tomorrow, the timing, and where they can go to receive information again.
Let me say this to Dr. Kemp real quick.
Yeah.
Guys like us at CBC celebrate an opportunity to pass out food tomorrow, but this brother's been serving every week in what they call a food desert. And so when people call into the food bank, what they do is they geotag, and then they develop partnerships with incredible people like Dr. Kemp, and that's where they get the food to. And Dr. Kemp, thank you for faithfully serving our city, man. I just grateful for you. And the food bank serves over 550 organizations in our city.
Wow.
And so let me say this, Pastor Newton, your story is great, by the way. It's better than mine. That's a great.
Both are great.
But we appreciate you as well for the great work that you're doing in this city in so many ways. And I have to really acknowledge that it's not really me. It's all those great folks who work with Sister Baker and who are still poised to provide that kind of assistance, who volunteer. They don't get paid, they just do it. So my name may get called, but it's really those people who are doing the work.
Yeah, but you had the heart for it, Dr. Kemp, and that is no small task. And man, grateful. I hear your name often, and now I feel like all of a sudden I'm going, man, we got to break bread together, and maybe we'll get Gavin to pay for it.
That's right.
Well, tell us a little bit. Tell us about the timing tomorrow. I want to shout that out. We're gonna take this one clip and promote it. We're gonna edit this out and we're gonna blast this out. So tell us a little bit what's happening tomorrow, the time, and what people need to do.
Yes, sir. Tomorrow is a mega food drive for the San Antonio Food Bank at 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. If you've not yet registered, you're in need of resources through food provision. Our encouragement to you is to sign up at safoodbank.org, and there you can register. There's over 1,000 people that are already registered. I know for somebody that may be listening right now, there may be this sense of, I got too much pride. Please put your pride aside. Allow the San Antonio Food Bank with people in this city that love you, be an encouragement to you from 2 to 5 o'clock, Community Bible Church. If you've not registered, I would just encourage you to do so as quickly as possible, because we want to make sure we come alongside of you and meet your needs.
All right. Thank you for that. We got some switcheroo here. Thank you for that, Pastor Newton, and the work you're doing. Again, you can go to safoodbank.org to learn all that information. Thank you for tuning into Pup Theology again. We do this every week now. We've been doing it every week since 2016 at the Friendly Spot, and we can't wait to be back there again in downtown San Antonio with people who come down. If you want to watch some of our past online Pup Theologies with Max Licato and Rabbi Samuel Stahl a few weeks ago, you can go back to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and watch that. We also had a great discussion with 3 amazing journalists 2 weeks ago covering COVID-19, a reporter from the Rivard Reporter, a reporter from the San Antonio Express News, and a reporter from Texas Public Radio. You can watch that conversation. And last week, we had a great conversation with Alex Bailey from Black Outside. It was a rescheduled pub event that was canceled, and we put it back online. And it's a conversation on how to get communities of color to find racial reconciliation in the outdoors. It's a wonderful organization. It's called Black Outside. So if you want to learn more about that and all the things that they're trying to do to encourage people in our community to find their self and their place in nature and in this world around them, you can go to that was last week's Pup Theology. Next Pup Theology next week, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to try this. We're going to try to Zoom Pup Theology, bring people all in together and just have a community talk and check in with each other. Pastor Chad from the Arsenal Church is going to lead that along with some pastors in town. So that's next week's Pup Theology. You can check that out and all the information and the links that you might need for that online at facebook.com/PupTheologySA. So we are going to end with this. I pulled it up, and this is going to a shout out to people, and especially to Sister Baker, right? And we're going to read Psalm 23. And after this is done, we're just going to sign off. So again, thank you to Dr. Bridger, who was on earlier. in the city of San Antonio for the work they are doing and the transparent work they have been doing. Even when mistakes happen, they've been transparent and trying to lead this great city to stay safe. She leads this wonderful group of people from Metro Health. Dr. Bridger from the city of San Antonio, Dr. Kemp from Antioch Baptist Church, thank you for joining us and having that discussion about how can churches slowly become involved again, and how do we come together again safely? What are the things that we should do versus the things we can do? And Dr. Newton, right? Dr. Newton, thanks for coming in the last minute and sharing a little bit about what the Community Bible Church has been doing, especially at the San Antonio Food Bank. Again, that drive is tomorrow, 2 to 5 p.m., safoodbank.org. So let us read Psalm 23. Psalm 23 goes like this: The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Amen. Thank you for another week of Pup Theology. Be blessed.
Bless you. Thank you.